Welcome to Amrita IAS Academy. Students, as a part of this particular lecture series, we will be discussing few questions from your GS1 perspective pertaining to history and culture. As a part of the students, the first question is presented in front of your screen. Let's see what it's saying. So basically, the question tells us to evaluate the nature of Bhakti literature and its contribution to Indian culture. Now students, let's forget about this particular question. I would like to give you a general outlook on analyzing any question when it comes from mains perspective. So basically, we look out for two things. Number one, what is the directive that is given as a part of the question? And second one, what are the one or two important keywords with which we will be able to create our proper answer? Keeping that in mind, the directive that is given to us as a part of this question is evaluate. You might have seen in different questions that we get directives such as evaluate, elucidate, discuss, comment, etc. All of these have different meanings and they change the direction in which we answer the question. Now herein, since the directive is very simple, that is evaluate, it literally translates that we have to write a narrative answer. A narrative answer, that means a descriptive answer. So I hope with this you are clear that the directive given here is extremely easy and we have to just elaborate the important points pertaining to Bhakti literature. Now apart from that students, if you will see, there are two keywords that are a part of this question, that is nature of Bhakti literature and Indian culture. So these two keywords students will be more important when we are formulating our body. I hope these two things are clear with each and every student. Now apart from looking out for the directive and keywords, the second thing students, when we do specifically for narrative answers of history, is the division of answer in three parts. That is your introduction, your body, and your conclusion. I would like to emphasize here students that please try to conclude each and every answer when it comes to history and culture as the presentation looks complete. Now students, when it comes to the introduction and conclusion, they are very much reinstating the facts that are given in the question. We are either agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. The innovation is something that comes in the body part, wherein you can either arrange your answer in pointer format or you can arrange your information in a form of flowchart, okay? Or you can create or arrange your data in a tabular format. So these are few ways in which you can arrange your data and that can look much more meaningful while taking less space. So with this students, I hope you have understood that what are the few things we look towards while creating an answer in our mind. Okay, so the directive is there, then we have keywords, and finally we see how am I going to arrange my answer. Now after this students, let's go back to our question. Now the question is divided into two parts. As you can see, there is a and in between. So basically we have to answer two things here. First of all, we have to describe the nature of Bhakti literature. That is, what kind of content is a part of Bhakti literature. And apart from that, the second part of the question is, how did it contribute to Indian culture? How was the culture, whether the culture got a push or the culture got a setback as a part of the creation of Bhakti literature. So these are the two parts that we will be explaining as a part of this question. Let's proceed further students. Let's first understand what we can put as a part of our introduction. Now naturally, since the question is revolving around the Bhakti literature, so we are going to start by explaining what is Bhakti movement and when it started. Keeping that in mind, students, this is a brief introduction that can be written as a part of your answer, wherein you can start by saying that the Bhakti movement was a religious reform movement. That is, there were certain changes that were required by the society. There was pressure within the society to make particular reforms in the current religious scenario. Now, keeping this in mind, students, I would like to give you a brief background of Bhakti movement. Prior to the Bhakti movement, we all know that in the Indian religious landscape, the domination was done by the Brahmins. It was institutionalized religion wherein if you want to do any offerings to the god, whether you want to pray to the god or worship or visit any particular temple, in order to do the offerings, you always need help of a Brahmanical priest. Now, because of that, many common people could not afford to partake in these religious activities. At the same time, students, the caste system as a part of the Brahmanical orthodoxy was very much prevalent, and as a part of this, the lowest category, that is the Shudras, were not even allowed to enter the temples or give their offerings to the god. Keeping this in mind, students, you can understand that how many sections of society were crying for a change. And this change, students, came in the name of Bhakti movement, which came as a response to Brahmanical orthodoxy. Just like the heterodox religions in ancient India, students, such as Buddhism and Jainism, which opened their gates to all people irrespective of their caste, creed and gender, similarly, Bhakti movement opened its doors for every caste and class. The idea of Bhakti movement was based on love and devotion to a particular god, and in between no middleman was needed. So basically, you can have a householder's life, you can belong to any particular caste, you just need to have love and devotion towards a single god, and you don't need any priest in order to offer your prayers to the god. Okay? So this was a religious reform movement as a response to the Brahmanical orthodoxy. Apart from that, students, in the introduction, you can also talk about the origin of Bhakti movement. So the origin of Bhakti movement, students, is something that can be traced in the early medieval period. The early medieval period is somewhere between 8th to 10th century AD, students, and at this point of time, particularly in South India, we see the rise of some sects such as Alvars and Nayanars, and after that the Bhakti movement slowly and gradually started to spread all across Indian subcontinent. Okay, so these are two basic things, maybe the nature of Bhakti movement, why it started in the first place, and which was its area of origin and time period, are something that can be a good introduction to your particular answer. After that, students, we will be moving on towards our body. Now, as you can see, there are two parts to our body. Number one, the nature of Bhakti movement, and the second one is its contribution to Indian culture. And since we have to evaluate it, so basically we'll just elaborate what kind of literature was written and how it was helpful in expanding the base of Indian culture. So let's proceed to the first part of the body, students, that is the nature of Bhakti literature. Now, when we talk about Bhakti literature, students, it was based on certain features such as the idea of social reform. As I had told you, students, just like the heterodox sects, that is Jainism and Buddhism, came as an answer, as a response to Brahmanical orthodoxy, similarly, the Bhakti literature and the Bhakti movement was an answer and response towards the ills that were prevalent as a part of Brahmanical supremacy. Hence, social reform was a major theme that can be seen as a part of the texts that were written by the Bhakti saints. Keeping that in mind, students, there were many Bhakti saints who opposed the caste system, opposed social evils such as untouchability, sati, etc. Also students, one major aim of Bhakti movement ultimately was to attack institutionalized religions and lower down the position of Brahmanical priests. Such examples can be seen in the works of Bhakti saints such as Basva, who had written his religious teachings which were known as Vachans. Apart from that, students, there was a certain sense of universality in the Bhakti literature. Why? Universality, students, because unlike the Brahmanical people who were talking about multiple gods and to please each god, the way to reach their heart was very different and different religious procedures or rituals had to be followed. Unlike that, in the Bhakti movement, the devotion was towards the oneness of all the gods, that is, the pantheon was one. One person had to believe just in one God and in the goodness of humankind in order to achieve nirvana. Okay. Now this could be done by the process that is bhakti. The students is performed with the help of devotional songs which were also known as kirtans, and all of these students were developed as a part of bhakti literature. Apart from that, students, we can see that the Bhakti saints were pointing out many things which were social ills at that point of time. And herein, one such social ill was being non-secular. That is, the difference between Hindus and Muslims that was very much prevalent. However, students, there were many Bhakti saints, particularly Kabir and Guru Nanak, who encouraged Hindu-Muslim unity by their works, that is Bijak and Guru Granth Sahib respectively. So both of these students were properly preaching the Hindu-Muslim unity, and at the same time they were also talking against the caste system. Then students, we have devotional hymns that were written as a part of Bhakti literature, and these hymns were composed by different saints or different sects that had emerged as a part of Bhakti movement. In that, students, you can also give certain examples. For instance, I have added one example here, that is Divya Prabandham, which was composed by the Alwar saints of South India, and these devotional hymn, students, very quickly became popular among the masses. One important reason why these hymns or devotional songs very quickly became popular among the masses was because these Bhakti saint students were using local languages, regional languages, because of which they could easily reach the masses. Finally, students, the Bhakti literature was focusing on the love and devotion towards a one single personal God, and these are some ideas on the basis of which the Bhakti literature was created. So majorly the corpus was devotional songs and hymns that were written in praises of gods, and at the same time the Bhakti literature was also highlighting social evils and how we should get rid of them. So these points, students, are sufficient enough to talk about the nature of Bhakti literature. After this, you can quickly move on towards the contribution of Bhakti literature to Indian culture. Now students, there were multifarious contributions that were done by Bhakti literature. It expanded the horizons of Indian religion. Yet students, you will see that there was no proper political action that was taken to institutionalize these ideas. Irrespective, students, on the cultural front, the Bhakti literature was very important when it came to Indian culture. Herein, students, you can add some points such as number 1, the growth of regional languages. I had already highlighted to you that one of the reasons why masses were so attracted by Bhakti movement, students, was because the Bhakti saints were using regional languages. Now, because they were using regional languages, naturally, all the writings that they have done led to a corpus of literature created in different regional languages. So you can write that point and add few examples of different Bhakti saints and their creations in different regional languages. For instance, students, you can see that Guru Nanak was teaching in his regional language, that is Gurmukhi. Then we have Baswa and Akka Mahadevi, who were preaching in Kannada language in their local area of influence. Apart from that, students, you will see that a big corpus of literature in Marathi, Avdi, Assamese, etc. languages were created by the Bhakti saints or enriched for further use. Apart from the growth of regional languages, students, the Bhakti literature was also very helpful in the promotion of performing arts such as music and dance. How? Let's take an example of the most famous saint of Assam, that is Shankar Dev. So basically what had happened, Shankar Dev created an institution known as Satras. Now these Satras, students, were religious places, okay, in which devotional hymns to Vaishnavite gods were offered. As a part of these Satra, students, many new forms of music and dance were also created under the guidance of Shankar Dev. In that sense, students, a new form of music, that is Borgeet, was created under Shankar Dev, and even the classical dance, that is Satriya, and theatrical performances such as Ankiya Nat were very well developed. Okay. So these are few things, that is promotion of music and dance, that was done as a part of Bhakti literature. Apart from that, students, as we are all aware, in ancient India, there were many schools of Indian philosophy, such as the Nyaya school or the Vaisheshik school, etc. Now, all of these school students were particularly talking about how a man should live, what is their ultimate goal of life, so on and so forth. Now, during the Bhakti movement time, students, there were many saints that had again worked on the concepts of Indian philosophy and created more and more commentaries. As a part of the students, naturally, the old corpus of Indian philosophy was enriched by these new writings that were done during the Bhakti movement. You can also add some examples. For instance, Vallabhacharya propounded the idea of Shuddha Advait or pure non-dualism, and Sri Ramanuj propagated the idea of Vishisht Advait. So you just have to give the example. You need not explain each and every philosophy in detail. We just need to tell the examiner that these were the kinds of changes that were happening due to the creation of Bhakti literature. So we have the growth of regional languages. At the same time, the old literature was being enriched by the new commentaries that were written by these Bhakti saints. Apart from the students, you can see that there were emergence of many sects as a part of Bhakti movement. Here in students, we can see that Guru Nanak started Sikhism. Then we have Nath Panthis, we have Alvars, we have Nayanars, we have Siddhars, etc. So many sects within one religion were coming up, and they were trying to reform the religion from within. Apart from that, students, religious reform needs no introduction. We are very well aware that whenever we talk about Bhakti movement, it is naturally associated with the concept of religious reform and throwing away the yoke of Brahmanical orthodoxy. As a part of the students, you can see that there were sects such as Nath Panthis or Yogis who had condemned the ritual practices that were done by Brahmins and other aspects of Brahmanical religious orthodoxy. Apart from the students, one very important contribution of Bhakti literature was in the enhancement of architecture and sculpture. Let's see how. So I have specifically taken here examples of the temples of South India, but you can very well add examples of North Indian temples as well. Now in South India, students, we know that the biggest dynasties were the Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas, and even the Vijayanagar dynasty was very prominent. As a part of the Bhakti movement, students, these particular dynasties commissioned temples which reflected the ideas of Bhakti saints onto the architecture and sculpture. For instance, students, you can see that the very famous Chola ruler, that is Parantak I, had created metal images of Bhakti saints such as Appar, Sambandar and Sundarar in his Shiva temple, And these particular metal images are even carried in processions when the festivals concerning these saints are celebrated. So you can see that not only the ideology, not only the literature written by these saints, but even their live images are a part of the sculptures of the temples, and they're adorning the walls of these temples. So all these points, students, were the contribution of Bhakti literature to Indian culture. They enhanced our regional languages. They enhanced our ancient literature such as Indian philosophical literature, and at the same time they became inspiration for sculptures of new temples. So with this we have completed our discussion on both the parts of our body. That is the nature of Bhakti literature, whether it was focusing upon religious reform or whether it was focusing upon doing away with the social evils. So that was the nature of Bhakti literature, and at the same time focusing upon devotional hymns. And apart from that, when we see its contribution to Indian culture, we see how it is enhancing many aspects of the society at the same time. However, students, from this entire discussion, one thing that you will see is missing is that none of these saints were actually able to politically influence any particular dynasty or political leaders to get an actual change within the society, whether to actually do away with the caste system or actually do away with the social evils that were put upon the women of the society. Hence, students, from this we can create a very small and accurate conclusion wherein you can highlight that how the Bhakti literature had provided a new awakening in the Indian culture, but at the same time it was unable to create a political atmosphere that could lead to a institutionalized change. Okay, so the answer should be kind of neutral, neither very positive, not very negative. So indeed, students, the entire corpus that was written had helped the masses become more awakened, understand about their rights, yet at the same time, we could not find any particular political movement that was supporting the Bhakti movement to actually make a proper change. So in this way, students, we can elaborately answer our Bhakti literature question. Hope you were able to understand it.
Amrita IAS Academy.